Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure podcast. My name is Nicki and I will be bringing you thoughts and ideas and hopefully some inspiration on how to build more adventure into your everyday life.
So today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Wendy Searle to the show. Wendy is an adventurer who at the start of 2020 became the 7th woman to ski solo and unaided from the Antarctic coast to the South Pole. She also works full-time as a civil servant and is the mother of 4 children. And I first came across Wendy probably about 3 years ago on Twitter. And at first I think this must have been when she was very first at the start of preparing for her expeditions. And at the time, I was just in awe of what she was doing. And like I said, just sometimes the struggle can just be to get out the door with kids. So how she's managed to juggle her time and fit in so much and do something so inspiring, I was just blown away by. And having sort of followed her journey since then, and then following her vlogs and her blogs that she sent when she was in the South Pole, would just some of the challenge she faced and how she overcame those, how she kept going, I just found incredibly inspiring. So it was such a joy when she agreed to come on the podcast and speak to me. So Wendy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to always talk about the expedition. And I just wanted to take you back, not 3 years, but 5 years, which is when I first came up with the idea and the plan.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long time coming. Team of army lads actually who were going to do a crossing of Antarctica back in 2015 when I worked for a military charity, and they were raising money for the charity. So they came along and said we were going to do this. They were going to do this thing, and I was like, oh yeah, very good. And my job was to promote some of the fundraising activity of the people who were raising money. And so I kind of found out a little bit more about what they were doing, and kind of gradually dawned on me that this was like more than your usual kind of 3 peaks, or I don't know, sitting in a bath of beans, whatever it was, that this was quite a big thing. And I went and did a training weekend with them to kind of find out a bit more about their stories. And then started reading a few books about Antarctica. I didn't really realise that polar travel was something people still really did. If you'd asked me who Scott and Shackleton were, I probably would have had a vague, hazy idea, but nothing really. As I kind of got more and more drawn into what they were doing, I got more and more drawn into this idea of Antarctica and how what a unique place it was, what an isolated and otherworldly place it was. And I think the kind of crystallizing moment was when I was at a training weekend with them, and someone was doing this cold weather injuries lecture. So they put up loads of pictures of people with kind of blackened fingers and bits of toes falling off and things. And a colleague from the charity leant over to me and said, "Oh, this looks absolutely horrendous. God, why would anyone want to do this?" And I just thought, this looks amazing. Why would anyone not want to? And it's probably that moment that I thought, I just wonder if this is possible. I'm not, in the army. I don't have recourse to any sort of army money. I haven't got any money. I haven't got any experience. I can't ski. I've got a full-time job. I've got 4 kids. What would it take to get from where I am now to actually kind of undertaking something like this? And that's when the seed of the idea was born. But it took me 5 years to realize that and actually kind of make it to Antarctica, never mind to the South Pole.
Wow. I mean, I love that, like you said, the things that would put most people off and just go, this looks either just absolutely unattainable, or why would you want to do that, is the very thing that made you think, yeah, maybe this is something that I really want to do. That sounds so exciting. I guess there's the idea, and there is going, okay, this is something I'd love to do, and I'm going to start exploring it. At what point did you think, actually, yeah, this really is possible? Was it a gradual accumulation of knowledge and experience, or was it, do you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to sort of break my way through all these barriers?
I think it was more the latter. I don't think there was ever a point where I thought, right, I can make this happen. It was more like I had decided somehow, whatever happened, I was going to attempt to make this happen. There's always that, I talked about this the other day actually, about the sort of niggling self-doubts, and there was so much self-doubt. There was like a chasm of self-doubt between where I was and where I needed to be, and whether or not that was possible. But I guess I just kind of got my head down and just kept plowing on. And the number one kind of key to it, and it's not like, yeah, I get it, lots of people probably don't want to ski to the South Pole, but it's about saying to yourself, I want to achieve X, I am going to do this. And looking at all the challenges as just things to be overcome, and not thinking it's all too difficult. But the approach to that is not thinking about the whole big thing. I've got to raise X thousand pounds and I've got to be in Antarctica in 2019, because that would just be too mind-blowing. I sort of broke it down into as smaller bits as I could manage to achieve bit by bit. So 5 years ago, it was like, well, what do you actually need to do to be dropped off on the coastline of Antarctica and be let loose on your own? And the logistics company that take people in and out won't just, if you suddenly decided tomorrow, they won't just drop you off. You've got to almost have a polar CV to prove to them that you've got the experience and you've spent time on your own in -30 or below. So I kind of set about working out what I would need to do to fill in that gap, and just did it little by little. And I think the consistency of it was the key to the success. It wasn't having loads of money, because I didn't have that. It wasn't being particularly physically I'm 5'5". I was pretty average at school. I wasn't kind of an athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but just taking the approach that if I do something towards this every day, all those little things will add up to an enormous, a large whole, and I will be able to move towards that. And I don't know, maybe I always believed that I would get to the start point. It's just kind of, I think it's a bit like having perhaps getting married. You don't think too much about what it's like being married. You just focus on the wedding, and when you have children, you focus on the birth and not actually what it's going to be like having a small person around. I definitely thought more about how can I get to this start point than I did about sort of what it was actually going to be like on the expedition.
That's so interesting. And I mean, I love those comparisons that you make, because you're so right. Actually, yeah, you don't actually think about, well, there's probably a very good reason why not thinking about what it's like to have children around is maybe there would be a lot less children around potentially. But
well, the comparison is if you talk too much about the expedition,
exactly. Yeah, I think that's such a great analogy. And I know there must have been many challenges along the way, both physical and, as you mentioned, the sort of psychological and the self-doubt. I mean, what was the biggest challenge for you that you felt that was something you really had to overcome and that you feel really proud of doing as well?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is raising the money. And, I started off with, £0 in my bank account. I had to go to the corporates and say, believe in me, because I didn't have any. And in fact, I wrote to a polar, big name in the polar community, and said, would you consider being my my patron for the expedition? And she wrote back and she said, well, actually, no, what's your polar credentials? And that was like a massive blow. But also, I'm going to corporate saying to them, I don't have any polar credentials. I've never done a big expedition. I've never been on my own for longer than 24 hours, maybe. I'm asking them to put their faith in me. And the amount of kind of self-belief that I had to try and instill in myself before going in front of these people was monumental. And I got round it, rightly or wrongly, by kind of making the expedition a sort of, it almost had a life of its own, certainly towards the end of it. And I was saying, this expedition is amazing. This expedition is going to be awesome. This is what I want you to believe in. And that was somehow easier, either as, I don't know, as a woman or just as someone without any kind of history of doing this. It was easier to ask people to put their faith in the expedition. But I had all sorts of different plans. And I think this is a really key thing about what the sort of defining moments of the expedition were. I had all these plans about going and pioneering a new route and taking a big team, and that was all kind of well and good, but people didn't kind of get it. And I think unless you're in that polar community, you're pioneering a new route, well, so what kind of thing. But the second I made it, I think I had a really deep and long conversation with another friend from the polar community. They really made me unpick what it was, why it was that I wanted to go there. And I was like, I want to do some science. They're like, yeah, that's all well and good, but why? And at the end of the day, I was just like, I am obsessed with this idea. It's got to be Antarctica. This is my one big shot. They were like, make it about that. And as soon as I was authentic about what I was aiming for, as soon as I made it right, this is going to be a solo expedition. This is going to be an attempt to be the fastest woman to ski solo to the South Pole. somehow everything else fell into place, because at that moment I was kind of, and I didn't have any money until that point. At that point I was being true to why I wanted to go, and that obviously came through in my sort of corporate pitches and everything. And literally a week later, I had on the basis of a handshake, someone offered me the start of the funding. So the funding was, and that's not something you have much control over, unlike training or kit research or whatever those things are. You can be really proactive, but it's actually quite demoralizing to. I went to a really big company, and there was 30k on the table, and it was like a yes or no. It wasn't like we'll give you a little bit, or it was like all or nothing. And in the end I got nothing, and I just said that you've got to pick yourself up from that, because the next day you might have to go out training and still kind of believe that you're going to make it and you're going to get this money. And actually I only got the last of the money, enough to get there, because it was payable in dollars, and it was all the time of the Brexit uncertainty when I was having to pay the bill. So every day that I woke up, the pound was 0.5% different against the dollar, which meant £500 in terms of the expedition. So I couldn't pay the bill until I had all the money. But every day that I woke up, I needed more money. So it was kind of getting into a bit of there was a lot of sleepless nights. And I paid the bill finally 2 weeks before I got on the plane to South America to then go on to Antarctica. So that the fundraising was one part of it. And people always say it's the hardest bit of the expedition. And the other bit was really about the kind of self-doubt and what I learned from that. So I was worried about people saying, I thought they were going to say, and who are they anyway? Who are they? But I thought they were going to say, oh, well, we knew you couldn't do it. We knew you were going to be rubbish. We knew you were sort of overstretching yourself. Who do you think you are trying to do something like this? And those things were always at the back of my mind, but I was trying to fight those with positive mantras almost of, trust your training and your experience. You can do this. Anything is possible, one day at a time, all of those kind of things. But it's a crowded place when you've got all those kind of things going on in your head, to the extent that I was dropped off with one other soloist and a team of I think 3 or 4, and they put you all in this tiny twin otter, and you kind of bounce your way onto the coastline, and they drop you off, and then that's it, you're kind of on your own. But I wasn't, because I was dropped off with other people. So there was I kind of faffing in my sled, my pug, thinking someone else is going to walk off first, and then I'll know that I haven't walked off in the wrong direction. But I knew that I wasn't walking in the right direction, but I was just looking for, not to be the one that messed it up. But gradually, as kind of time went on throughout the expedition, you have to, because otherwise, your mind would unravel, you'd end up in a crevasse, you'd just kind of give up. But you have to trust your own judgment. And that's really unusual and difficult, because we don't do that in day-to-day life. We don't, you're usually with someone else. And even if you have already kind of made your mind up, we're doing this today, or we're stopping here to camp, you still bounce those ideas off other people. You're looking for that kind of consensus. So to just do that on your own is unnatural. But I did get to a point where I thought, actually, I have navigated this far. I sort of do know what I'm doing. But it took a long time to get into that. And perhaps later in the conversation, I can tell you about the sort of moment of when I realised I was going to make it. But perhaps that's for later on.
I was about to say, because that was going to be my next question. At what point did you think, at what point in a way did that internal dialogue shift, I suppose?
So I think that feeling went almost as soon as I was dropped off, and I hadn't really articulated it even to myself, but on reflection, I realised that I decided there was absolutely no way I was going to call for help unless it was a medical emergency, or, I'd lost my tent or something. I was not going to give up. And I think that comes back to the fact that I had all these challenges and barriers. This was my one shot. And if I messed this up, I was not going to get another chance. And I kind of it was a sort of all or nothing thing. And I think as soon as I set off, I thought, I'm not giving up. But it was just that if you think about it as a totality again, it was just too much. So after about 4 days of kind of plodding along quite happily, there was a storm, and it wasn't a particularly bad one. But I sort of set my tent up early, skied late the next day, kind of got around it. But at that point, I think it suddenly dawned on me that I was going to be out there for like weeks and weeks and weeks on my own. And it was just such a kind of, you make such tiny increments of progress. So it was like, I don't know, it's 715 ordinary miles. So what's that in nautical miles? I don't know, like 600 nautical miles. You're making 15 nautical miles a day, if you're lucky. And if the conditions allow. and it's just so kind of, it's mind-blowing. So you've got to kind of really break it down again into these tiny little increments. So I'd get into my tent at night at the end of the day, and I draw a heart on my tent, like almost like when you see prisoners doing like a tally on the walls to count the days. Because in my head, if I did a heart, that would make it positive and something that I loved. And I had all these like little, I'd get up every morning, I'd get out my tent before I started skiing, and I'd do like a power pose, like a superhero power pose at the sun, just to have been like, I'm going to make it through another day, even though like the mornings were so hard and like there was a lot of crying. I really didn't want to be there. I wanted to just, go home and see my kids. And I think after halfway, it did start to get a little bit mentally easier. And then it wasn't until I was probably 9.7, something like that, 9.7 nautical miles, so about 13 miles. So a day skiing still out from the pole, but because everything's like 360-degree white horizon, anything man-made sticks out like for miles. And I could see just out the corner of my eye this thing that looked like a submarine, a mini submarine. And I thought, that's got to be the South Pole. It's a massive science station. That's got to be it. And I was listening to Danny the Champion of the World, which you'll be familiar with because your kids are of that kind of age. And it was a euphoric moment in Danny the Champion of the World. And I love that book. And I've been saving that audio book for the last day anyway. And I'd been skiing for 12 hours previously. I'd wrapped my tent up. I'd had a massive feast of everything that I could find that was kind of leftover food. I'd eaten all this food. And then I'd kind of, because it's 24-hour daylight, I'd then told myself, right, you've had a rest. It's like you've been to sleep. Just pack up and get going. And so instead of sleeping for the night and then starting again in the morning, I just packed up and got going again. So I was sort of skiing. I skied through the night, and I skied for 25 hours. At this point where I saw the South Pole, I kind of hadn't slept for however long, and I'd been skiing for maybe 13, 14 hours, something like that, pulling this poke. And when I saw it, all the 42 days of hardship and focus and trying to just survive and make progress, and then all the 5 years of effort and sacrifice and fundraising and continual kind of focus on this end goal, all kind of telescoped into this one moment of seeing the pole. And it wasn't until then everybody said to me, oh, you've got this, you're going to smash it, we know you can do this. The only person that didn't believe that was me until I saw the South Pole. And it was, I'd been skiing for 42 days and I was still a day's 9 hours skiing or something from the pole. But it wasn't until then, 9 hours before the end, when I actually realized, you have got this, you can do this. And the shift in self-belief and who I was as a person because of that was so fundamental that, even like, and it's all a year on Monday is when I left for Antarctica, when I landed in Antarctica. And even now I can kind of I can conjure that moment as being so powerful. And so kind of, it was such a mixture of relief and elation. And yeah, you can be proud of yourself. You have done something epic. This is bloody impressive. It's something that's such a rare thing, I think, as maybe as women, or just, we're never in that kind of situation day to day where we've kind of achieved this objective, because we're always sort of just ticking things off the list and moving forward day by day. But this was something so kind of defining that even now, it feels like a really emotional thing just to talk about. And I came back a different person because of that.
Wow. I don't even know where to start with that. What I find, so, that resonates so much, I guess, with some of the stuff that I talk around about resilience, and that actually it is often those moments, I certainly know for me, it's those moments where I've, like you said, done something that I didn't believe was possible. No matter what anybody else said to me, it's like you said, it's what was inside going, I don't think you can do this, or I'm not sure. And then you do it. And those are the moments I go back to when I'm really struggling. So it's so interesting. Obviously nothing anywhere near in comparison as achieving the South Pole. But I think, like you said, that sort of that culmination of I can't even begin to imagine the emotions you must have been experiencing. So
I just had another thought, which is that I often start talks to school children in particular with a quote from Maya Angelou. And she said, having courage does not mean we are unafraid. And I think that is so key for me, because if you wait until you're brave enough, you will never do half the things that, we could achieve in life. And just feeling those kind of feelings of apprehension and fear and and worry about all those things that could go wrong is normal, but you know, plowing on ahead is perhaps the thing that is more difficult.
No, absolutely, it's so true. It's come through, I guess, so many of the guests I've spoken to, that thing of doing it even though you're absolutely terrified and have no idea where it's going to go. Somehow keeping the faith and keeping going it seems to be so much of the key to it. I mean, you mentioned there about, you know, a year on, what you've been left in. I just wondered if you could sort of just, what are the key things that you've taken away? Obviously the thing around fear and courage, but is there anything else that you think, actually, that's something I didn't expect? That's a benefit that's come out of it. This wasn't sort of ever part of the plan, but that's the thing that I go back to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the courage fear thing is actually pretty easy to replicate. We don't all need to ski to the South Pole to do that, but it's about moving out of your comfort zone. And that's, I think, why, you know, you were talking before about jumping off cliffs and things. You don't jump off a cliff because it's a wacky fun thing to do. You do it because you're stretching your comfort zone, and that then allows you to look at a job promotion, or, you know, having that difficult conversation, or, you know, it shows you that yes, you can do things even though they're kind of scary. So I think that's a kind of real life lesson for me. And the consistency thing was absolutely what I take away from it. If you want to achieve something, you can't just go, right, I'm going to go for a 10-mile run tomorrow and then like be in tatters for 3 days. It's a consistency of approach that will achieve big goals. And, you know, lots of tiny steps adds up to 600 nautical miles to the pole. And I think I was probably the most boring expedition, because you have to ring every night to the logistics company. It's a set time, and if you don't ring twice in 48 hours, they will come and rescue you from the last known point, whether you want rescuing or not. So the call was like a really massively important thing. And they say to you, you know, how many miles have you done today? And I said, oh, you know, I've done 15 nauticals or 14.7, or, you know, one day I think I did 19, which was my top sort of mileage. Oh, have you had any gear issues? No. Have you had any medical issues? No. That was that, really. They were like, do you want news from your country? I was like, absolutely not. You know, I wanted that sort of, you know, sort of isolation. That was a big part of it. But it was just the consistency. So the consistency, and also, like, I suppose the unintended consequences is about appreciation of the small things. So even now, a year on, especially if I've kind of been out I can sort of get the hit again from going out for a couple of days in Cairngorms, or, you know, a sort of big long walk almost in sort of horrible weather. You just appreciate a hot bath, a warm dry bed, a tap that turns on and delivers water, you know, doing the school run, all the things that you miss so terribly when you're kind of putting yourself in that environment of hardship and deprivation. That those things really are the important things. And the other unintended consequence, slightly more negative, I guess, is that I particularly sort of things like emails or bureaucracy, I have such a low tolerance for that now. And I'm just like, are you serious? Are you seriously telling me that this X thing that you've emailed me about is even important, you know? And so I struggle with that a little bit. And maybe, you know, an office job might not be for me in the long term, who knows? But it has fundamentally changed the way I look at the world as well, and only for the good, I
think. Wow. And I guess just on that is, so you've, like you said, that, you know, the benefit of finding that you're seeing things through a slightly different lens as well. I know that's something that people sometimes struggle with when they've done something really huge and that they've been working towards for such a long time, that at the end of it, although there are all those wonderful things that you start to appreciate, it can also feel like something stopped, or that, you know, there's a sort of a period of mourning where you've left that behind. And I just wondered for you whether you experienced that, or whether thinking forward, have you gone, right, I need to do something else, or actually it's ignited me something to take in a different direction potentially?
I think that ironically, I was never lost in Antarctica, but since I came back, I have felt a little bit lost, like not quite sure what direction and I think that's been compounded, like for everyone, with COVID, because I think within 6 days of landing back in the UK, I was messaging the logistics company saying, look, I will do anything to get back to Antarctica, you know, let's plan that. I need to plan another expedition, I'll be in touch, kind of thing. And I think that was possibly, you know, like such a short-term sort of response to it, but actually that has, and now I'm coming towards the year anniversary of, you know, leaving for Antarctica, all the things that happened during the expedition, finishing at the pole, that feeling has risen to the surface again. And yeah, I think there's a lot written about how you mentally prepare for expeditions and hardship, not so much about how you actually manage when you get back. And it definitely hasn't been easy, because it's like I cut out a little Wendy shaped hole when I left, and I changed. It's nothing else changed, but I felt like it had. But I realized that, or friends actually said to me, it's not the world that's changed, it's you that has. So trying to fit back into that little cutout that I'd left has been really challenging. And part of the solution is planning another expedition, which again has been hard because everything just feels like it's a bit on hold because of COVID. And yeah, I'm still not sure. I think I'm still figuring it out, because actually the more I look at all those pictures from last year, the more I think actually that's where I want to be, and not here. And that's kind of difficult to sort of articulate, I guess, to the family. It's not that I don't want to be with them, but that feeling of having this purity of purpose, of having absolutely no interaction with the outside world, absolutely no contact with news and politics, because I was a bit, I am quite a news junkie generally, but it's interesting to see that when I got back and I put the news on straight away, because I was like, I kind of miss being out of this kind of connection with the outside world. One, I didn't want to hear it, and two, it felt like literally nothing had changed, like no time had passed, because everything, all the same things are still being discussed in the same way. And I kind of felt like, come on guys, we need to kind of do something differently here. And I suppose that is a sort of perhaps the sense that I feel that I need to be doing more with what I've learned, and it's quite difficult at the moment because of lockdown and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think I'm still working that out.
Yeah, and like you said, it would be challenging at the best of times without the situation that we've all found ourselves in over the last sort of 9-10 months. So exactly, it's I think for so many people it's so difficult just to even see into next year, let alone think about what's ahead. But I mean, everything we've discussed has been so rich, I think, in advice and ideas about how to get started. But I guess if you were just to distill everything you've done and talked about into one piece of advice for somebody who's listening to this a little bit like you were 5 years ago, wow, that sounds like the most incredible idea, I want to do this, what would you say to them?
Start now. Don't wait for Monday or tomorrow, or what one thing can you do today that moves you closer towards that goal? So is it speaking to someone who's done what you want to do before? Is it looking at kind of kit and equipment you might need to do that? Is it looking at some sort of training program? And you don't need to spend, I think my training program, I was very fortunate that my coach John at E3, I've got to give him a shout out because he's just been so awesome. He did it all for free because I was his sort of adventure exhibition guinea pig. But I didn't go to an expensive gym. I dragged a tire around. You don't have to spend a lot of money to kind of get yourself closer to the goal. And if it's the other thing is, I suppose, is if it's something that you're passionate about, that will come across when you're speaking to people, and that will help give your project some momentum. So I suppose why you want to do something is just as important as what you want to do. But don't kind of think, oh well, I'll do it another time, or I'll wait till lockdown's over. There's always something that you can do to move yourself closer to that goal.
Yeah, and that's so true, isn't it? That sense of purpose. Why am I doing this? What is it that will keep me going through all of this? And I think has probably come through to every single person I've spoken to who has done something, is actually that sort of deep internal motivation. And if you can tap into that and share that, then like you said, you bring others along with you too. Wendy, that's been so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing such a powerful story. If people want to find out more about you or potentially expeditions in the future, where can they go?
So if they follow me on Instagram at Between Snow and Sky, that's probably the place. Like my website is southpole2020.com, but obviously that's kind of looking backwards now. And I suppose the thing that always strikes me that people think is nonsense, but I honestly believe, is that anybody can do anything. And I sort of, there's definitely a conversation about checking my privilege when I say that, but I would consider myself to be an ordinary person. There is nothing special about me apart from a drive to succeed. And I think that is, it really does come across that anybody, a mum, an office worker, I'm 43 now, so I'm not kind of a young person, anybody really can do anything. And that has kind of been borne out by the expedition itself.
Fantastic. That's such an amazing place to leave it on as well. Thank you so much, Wendy, for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And hopefully we'll speak to you again when whatever happens next, you can come back in and share it.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye. So I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Wendy. I wanted to pick up today on her point about consistency. She mentioned it several times throughout our conversation. And it's something, funnily enough, that I was discussing recently with my husband, just around business and how, you grow business. Actually, so much is made about there is a magic solution to this, or, if you just do this one thing, suddenly your following or your clients, whatever, will skyrocket. And the reality is that most of it sits in that space of consistency. So showing up every day, being consistent in your message, being consistent in what you offer, being consistent in who you are and how you approach things, and having trust and faith that the way that you are approaching things is getting you somewhere, even if you can't see that at the time. So I thought it was really interesting that Wendy pointed to consistency is actually probably the key enabler in the end of how she got from a start point of 0 to actually stepping out onto the ice in Antarctica. And I think it's something that is overlooked, which is why I wanted to talk about it. It is something that we tend to ignore in favor of, focusing on possibly the more exciting aspects of an adventure, or thinking that something isn't possible because we don't have various building blocks in place. And as Wendy showed, actually, the fact that taking it in very small chunks, and I know this is something we've talked about in the podcast previously, taking things in small chunks, but also just keeping on going, even when you don't know where you're headed, or even if it's going to work or what the outcome's going to be. But simply that process of putting one foot in front of the other, keeping on chipping away, whether it's at the admin, whether it's at the, whatever aspect you're doing, same applying to fitness, just keeping on going, even when you're having really tough days. Actually, there is a real magic in that process too. And I find that really reassuring, because I think what it goes back to is her message that actually for most of us, or for many of us, are capable of the things that we want to achieve, to get to. It's just finding a way to start the process and then to keep showing up as well. So I'm going to leave you with that thought for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back again next week. We're starting to near the end of season 2. I'm not quite sure where the time is going over the last few months, but I've got another guest for you next week. So please do join me again then. In the meantime, if you want to find me on Instagram, I'm at Resilience at Work. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club, or you can get in touch via my website, which is resiliencwork.co.uk. So please do reach out, leave me a review, let me know what you think of the podcast. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Otherwise, look forward to speaking to you again next week, and I'll have another incredible guest to share with you. Speak to you then. Bye.